Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We'll let people trickle in. We'll give them another 30 seconds or so. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. If you feel comfortable doing so, please let us know where you're zooming in from geographically. Love to see where people are. I'm in Manchester, New Hampshire tonight, and it is a little swampy up here. Rather humid, rather wet. Great to see so many familiar names. Florida's here. Oh, nice. Stillman, New Jersey. Thanks for being with us. New York City. Sharon James is here from Camden, Maine. Thanks for being here. It's raining in Massachusetts too. Hmm. Chicagoland. Nancy, I'm wondering, is that Chicago? Oh, we've got Evie from California. And we've got thunderstorms on the eastern seaboard. I feel like I'm reporting in for a weather report. All right, keep sharing where you're coming from. I love to see it. I love to see all these familiar names and some new names that are joining us tonight. If for some reason you have never been to one of these Zooms before, my name is Jane Oneail and I own the company Culturally Curious. I specialize in putting together art appreciation programs like this one, and I'm so happy that every month the Chelmsford Public Library, the Amesbury Public Library, the Tewksbury Public Library, and the Groton Public Library, and sometimes the Ashland Public Library come together to let me share what I'm doing over Zoom. So, again, welcome. And tonight we have a special treat, something sort of out of the norm for what we normally do, because we're going to look at an artist that has such strong leanings and such strong interests in math and science. And that's a little bit different for us, say, from maybe like Leonardo da Vinci. So it's a different bend tonight, and I probably don't even need to give the quick preamble that I am in no way a mathematician. So if somebody knows better or wants to like fill in some of the specific math elements to this, please feel free to do that. So again, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to explore the work of the world's most famous graphic artist, or at least one of the most famous, M.C. Escher, and he was renowned for his mind-boggling prints, um, his uh, his explorations of the impossible, the infinite, and reflections. We're going to be delving into all of that. Escher's unique fusion of art and mathematics continues to challenge and captivate people around the world today. We see his work, we understand his work to be this important bridge between creative expression and logical thinking. And since we're looking at them right now, let's just spend a moment here to start off with these beautiful hands, this impossible drawing here that I think just kind of dazzles the eye. This is a 1948 lithograph, and we can see that paradoxically, these two hands are drawing each other into existence. They go from a simple line drawing at the cuff to fully realized, perfectly shaded, illusionistically three-dimensional hands that emerge into the real world, into three-dimensional space, and off the page itself. It sort of captivates you as you're looking at it, right? And I'm going to use this moment to introduce the fact that M.C. Escher was left-handed. So, like a small percentage of people on the planet, he accessed a different side of his brain throughout his life, and in order to make his famous works of art. Now, there are a number of famous left-handed artists out there, including Leonardo da Vinci. So I had to go looking for some of Leonardo's hands because, of course, Leonardo believed that hands were essential to expressing interior emotional truths. And so we have this absolutely gorgeous comparison here. You almost have to believe that M.C. Escher was looking at this drawing by Leonardo da Vinci from 500 years earlier, where we have two fully realized three-dimensional illusionistic hands emerging from a line drawing, sort of referencing the self all the while. And so what we get with M.C. Escher's illusionistic hands are those references to infinity, to the impossible, and the self-reference to our main themes for tonight. So let me give you a sense in terms of how we'll use this hour that we have together. We're going to get started with just a quick introduction to the artist and an overview of his early years, get a sense in terms of where he started from. And then we'll head into what is known as his mathematical awakening, where we'll talk a little bit about tessellations and his fascination with metamorphosis. We turn our attention then to illusions and the impossible, which is really fun. And then reflections and distortions. We'll see some of his famous self-portraits at that point, and then touch on the infinite and the artist's legacy. So let's just dive right in. I love a good baby picture, as you know, and here he is, Moritz Cornelius Escher. He was born just before the turn of the century, and he is Dutch, was Dutch. So he lived about an hour and a half outside of Amsterdam, and we have these adorable childhood photos here. He came from a well-educated middle-class family. His father was a civil engineer, and it was a family that really valued intellectual curiosity. He had academically successful older siblings, but he was kind of considered the odd man out in his family. He tended to be sort of on the sickly side, and that meant he missed a lot of school, and he wasn't as academically successful as his siblings. In fact, I believe he failed the second grade because he missed so much school. Now, despite all this, he did finish school and he went on to actually study architecture. Here's a photo of M.C. Escher from around the age of 20 years old. So he's studying architecture, even though as a child he had no predisposition to mathematics. It was not a good subject for him. And as it turns out, studying architecture wasn't a good field for him either. So combined with still kind of failing health, he decides to change his major and he switches to graphic design. And we can see that this is a field that fits him perfectly. I love this early self-portrait here because he's, again, probably about 20 years old. We can see how seemingly easily this woodcut process comes to him and how he's using these very different qualities of line in order to suggest a background, to suggest the sheen of the hair, not to mention that very intense gaze. I think of this as like classic art school angst, right? There's an intensity here, maybe even some emotional turmoil even. Now, it's when he was in art school that he gets his first commission, and some of these images from his first commission really give us a sense of who he is and where he's going career-wise. So his friend was publishing a pamphlet, and he had M.C. Escher do 19 woodblock prints for that pamphlet. The first one over here, I just love. I'm tickled by it every time I see it. The one on the left is called Perfume or Odor. And so we can see a human face that's been like twisted and contorted so that the figure here can sort of wince and simultaneously plug their nose at whatever offensive smell they are smelling. Notice how the artist has used this entire rectangle here in order to compress the face within this shape. At the center, we have a work that M.C. Escher called Scapegoat. And so we have this interesting symmetry in the image where we have the vision of Christ on one side in white, the vision of the devil on the other side in black, this interest in duality we will see he gets back to towards the end of his career. And then that's combined with the images of the white and the black goat here as well. So this sense of crosswise symmetry, almost like a playing card, emerges very early on. And then finally, we have this work that's called Beauty. And what a beauty it is. This is a geometric pattern. It's not a symmetrical pattern. We can see all of these little variances throughout. It's based on a crystal pattern. And then as you look at it, it's like you have this aha moment. It looks like a diamond ring, doesn't it? But we can see this intense interest in geometric patterning as we're looking at it. So just after MC Escher finishes art school, he begins to travel around Italy. He spends like 2 weeks right off the bat just traveling around Italy, and he's doing a ton of sketching. Then, about 6 months later, when he's back home in the Netherlands, he turns those sketches into prints. And so we're looking at an image from 1922. It's a woodblock print, and it's the Italian town, the medieval sort of fortress town of San Gimignano, recognizable from all of these medieval towers here in the distance. So we can see this interest in architecture, but most of the picture, like 3/4, 2/3 at least, of the picture are kind of taken over by these rolling hills and then the sort of swirling lines of the natural world in the foreground. Young MC Escher, believe it or not, was actually very influenced by the art movement Art Nouveau. But within a few months, he's reworking this same image, and we can see that he is now downplaying, even diminishing the role of the natural world here. And it's all about these cubes and these geometric um, uh, shapes that emerge from this town. And it's about creating the illusion of 3 dimensions, and it's about rendering the details of this medieval village. This is what truly fascinates him. And he goes back to it again and again. He goes back to Italy again and again. He is in love with Italy. And so, not surprisingly, he falls in love in Italy. He meets a Swiss girl named Jetta Umaker. She was also traveling through Italy, and she was in love with Italy. So it was sort of a match made in heaven. We can see the young lovers here, and we can also see a self-portrait by the artist from exactly the same time. And now he's got his signature beard, which he's essentially going to wear for the rest of his life. And now we've got a new vision of him. Gone is the angsty art school student, and now we see a mature young man with the beard. And notice how he's rendered the beard here. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And even suggested the plane of the flesh here as well. It almost reminds me of like a Van Gogh self-portrait. But now he's got this straightforward kind of eternal stare, a young man who is full of potential and gazing into his future. So everything's changed now. And this relationship that he has with Jetta Umaker, it starts with love and with affection, but over the years, it faces its own share of struggles. And by the end of their lives, although they remain married, Jetta and MC Escher begin to live apart from each other. So decades after marrying, MC Escher creates this lithograph print that he called the Bond of Union. This is 1956. And he's created this likeness of he and his wife as these young, idealized faces. But these faces have become fragmented. In fact, they look like they're dissolving into like ribbon form and coming apart. So we can trace them as this ribbon that winds around, and it's a ribbon that's connecting these two heads. And what's more, it's actually interlacing between their two heads. It's sort of connected at the temple there, suggesting a kind of intellectual connection that maybe withstands even the emotional or loving connection that they have. He sets these two dissolving ribbon faces against this black void that's filled with all these little spheres, kind of suggesting eternity here, right? So they're kind of floating out there in the void, but forever connected. Now, MC Escher and his wife did have three children, and we can see MC Escher with his children in these two images here. But I love that he's wearing a suit at the beach. Maybe just that was something that people did, who knows? But by all accounts, he was a loving father. He had three sons. None of them went on to become artists. But by all accounts, the work came first. He was totally absorbed in the images that he was making. And when he had time, he could be a good parent to his children. So we end this quick little introduction to the artist with two more self-portraits. We have on the left an image called Self-Portrait from 1929, and on the right another one that's interestingly called Oval Mirror, even though it looks round to me, and that's from 1943. So almost 15 years separating these two works. They're both astonishing, aren't they? I mean, I particularly love the way he's rendered every hair on his face in this image over here on the right. So a couple of big takeaways with when it comes to MC Escher. First of all, I want you to know that he was not really a part of any artistic movement. He was an artist who was aware of what was happening in the world, but working in relative isolation. And when it comes to his interest in mathematical and scientific concepts, MC Escher was, for the most part, just working intuitively. It's not that he started with the math and then went on from there, or really studied and understood a scientific concept that then inspired his art. He started with the art and he had a sense of how it connected to these other fields. It took a while for the art world to embrace him. In fact, the worlds of math and science embraced him first. They saw what he was doing and how it was relevant and important. But it wasn't really until the 1960s, and you have like the whole counterculture movement, that people started to see these mind-boggling pictures that he was doing as a sort of a form of artistic expression. Because prior to that, people were like, these are interesting technical exercises, or they're kind of like illustrations, but they didn't quite know how to place them. So we have this fascinating artist here who is producing all of this work. Roughly 400 lithographs and woodcut prints and linoleum cut prints during his career, numerous drawings and sketches. And what we will see is that his meticulous approach to making art sort of holds steady and true right up until the end. So let's turn our attention to tessellation and metamorphosis, his so-called mathematical awakening. So here he is, this young artist. He's traveling all around Europe. He's inspired by all of these beautiful places that he's sketching. And art historians like to point to a particular trip in the 1930s to Granada, Spain, where he visits the Alhambra. It's this beautiful medieval fortress, really, that is filled with all of these sort of Arabic designed tiles. And the tile patterning is dense. Sometimes it's incredibly intricate. And like the sort of myth around MC Escher is that it's this visit that inspires this interest in tessellations. I just want to show you, I mean, he was very much interested in the tile work and the tessellations at the Alhambra. This particular pattern in the image, the photograph over here on the left, we can see that the artist rendered as a very precise drawing over here on the right. Now we have the artist sitting on a tiled fountain here, and I have next to it a good example of a tile pattern from the Alhambra. This is another example of the sort of thing he would have seen while he's there. And this is supposedly what inspires this love of tessellations for MC Escher. And you might be thinking, I've never heard this word tessellation, or I haven't heard it in a while. What does it mean? It basically means a pattern, but it's a pattern where there are no gaps, no overlaps, and it can sort of go on infinitely. So it's like a tile pattern, basically. Now, when it comes to tessellations, there are easy tessellations, like the ones that you see here, regular polygons. Any one of us could probably create a tessellation based on squares or triangles if we had pencil with a lot of erasers and a ruler at our disposal. And every now and then, MC Escher would even sort of dabble in what is a rather easy tessellation. So we can see a kind of star pattern here, but this is a woodblock print that's based on this diamond shape. It's sort of like the shape of a kite. And as you look a little bit closer, you can see that that diamond shape is composed of two figures, two very fleshy figures. One of them is a seated man. He's sitting crisscross applesauce, and he's got a big beard here. And then he seems to be sitting on the back of a woman who is bent over in half, and she is smiling out at us. And sort of like that perfume picture that we saw before, he has compressed their bodies in interesting ways to fit within the shape of this diamond. And then he can take this woodblock print and repeat it again and again, configuring it into this star shape here that's so pleasing. So, so this is a rather easy tessellation. With, MC Escher's work being our standard here, our baseline. He also did irregular and difficult tessellations. This is a work that he did called Eight Heads. This is an astonishing work to me, and he did this tessellation way before he ever went to Spain. So the idea that like those tile patterns inspired something in him, maybe they did, but he was already sort of intellectually geared towards this idea of tessellation. So a hard or an irregular tessellation involves shapes that are complicated, curved forms that again fit together without any overlaps and gaps. This one is from 1922, so he's what, like 24 years old when he makes this. Honestly, I think something like this is an achievement almost on par with like Michelangelo carving the Pietà. This is complicated stuff. It's called Eight Heads, but it's not because there are eight heads in the image. It's because the grid is really eight heads. And it's probably easier to see here. If we just look within this red square here, we've got our first head, an interlocking upside down head over here. So that's number 2. Number 3, a larger head in profile. Number 4 is an upside down head over here that interlocks. We have our 5th head, an upside down face that's black in color with a long beard here. That interlocks with the shape of almost like a pirate's face over here. That would be number 6. Number 7 is another upside down black face here with a long goatee. And number 8 is this chubby cheeked face with the top hat on. So we can see he expands out this tessellation in different directions, but he never repeats that initial pattern of the 8 heads again. Now, one of the most astonishing things to me, and it might be a well-duh moment for you, is that this tessellation, this very complicated, irregular tessellation that he created when he was just 24 years old, works both upside down and right side up. What kind of brain produces this? I mean, isn't this astonishing to you? I think that this is amazing. So we have MC Escher kind of fascinated by shapes interlocking and working together. He's also becomes fascinated in this idea of change, shapes that interlock and fit together, but also slowly evolve into something else. And that's how we get this work here that's called Metamorphosis Number 1. This is from 1937. This is a woodblock print. And it's about 3 feet long. So it's like a long scroll. And you read it from left to right. And it starts off with this view of what's probably like a little Italian seaside town. He loved Italy so much. And so we get, these interesting buildings and towers, and even the suggestion of like the waves breaking against the rocks here. And as our eye moves to the right, those buildings, this seaside town that's like built up on a hill, eventually becomes simplified into just cube-like forms. And then those cube-like forms begin to dissolve into something that looks, I don't know, a little bit more like a star, but it takes the gray, the white, and the black, and it separates them out into something that looks flat and eventually turns into this figure wearing a hat that emerges fully formed at the other end of this scroll-like design. And it's almost like a cartoon like figure here, like an Asian inspired figure. So it's pretty astonishing to go from this kind of realism to to metamorphosize through this passageway, through these tessellations into something that is kind of sort of sweet and fun. And this is really just the beginning for him. So he's just whetting his appetite on this. Now, the same year, he does the woodcut print night, day and night. Oh, sorry, this is the following year. This is one of his most popular prints, and we can see this interest in symmetry. We can see this interest in tessellation. And let's see, where do we begin here? We have daytime on the left. We have nighttime on the right, although they're represented as like two different geographic spaces, identical spaces though. We've got a little town here with its prominent church right alongside the river, and a little town over here with its prominent church also right alongside the river. And the the fields in between these two towns, they almost look like a checkerboard pattern. And as our eye moves up, they slowly morph and dissolve into the shape of these birds. We have the blackbirds moving into daytime, the white birds moving into nighttime. They stand out very crisply that way. And as they're passing each other, they form this amazing tessellation. So the night and the day are unified here. The sky and the ground are unified. It's a really pleasing and very smart and complicated composition. And we can see that during this time, M.C. Escher is just fascinated by all things related to these animal tessellations. I love this drawing over here on the left because you can see how he's laid in a grid and then sort of works from that to create the birds and the fish that are interlocking. Over here on the right, we have an example of his work called Sky and Water 1. This is a woodcut, and we can see how he's using the water here as like this black area. We have a fully realized fish at the bottom, and stacked above it are fish that get more and more simplified and eventually become a tessellation with these blackbirds. And then we emerge from the water into the sky. The sky is white, and the blackbirds become more and more detailed, resulting with this top bird at the pinnacle point in this composition. So he's really smart about designing these tessellations. And I challenge you, the next time you are someplace really boring, you're in a waiting room, you're on a train, whatever, just try to make a tessellation. They are very hard to make. It's not something that I think comes naturally to people, but this is something that seemed to flow from him. And as World War II was starting to break out, he spent about 6 months on this work here. We're going to go through it with a little bit more detail, but this is Metamorphosis 2. This he worked on from 1939 to 1940. This is another woodcut print. It's in black, green, and brown, and the entire work is about 13 feet long. So this is a massive undertaking. We're going to start over here, and I'll take you through it section by section. It starts with a word, surprisingly enough, and it's the Dutch word for metamorphosis. It's metamorphose. And so he's taking that word and he's using the word to create a basic shape, a basic sort of checkerboard shape. Then the words themselves and the letters dissolve into just a pure black and white checkerboard shape, which we can see is beginning to morph into another shape, almost something star-like. And then that sort of transitional shape turns into like a lizard or a salamander. Oftentimes his salamander lizard figures are just called like lizards or reptiles. And so we can see those three colors and the three kinds of reptiles sort of interlocking with each other. An animal form that's also a tessellation here. The lizards then dissolve into another sort of star-like shape that then turns into a hexagon, a sort of honeycomb pattern. Now, all of a sudden, we are in a hive. We can see the metamorphosis of these bees from larvae, and then the bees or bugs or I think they're flies or bees, start emerging, they must be bees, from the honeycomb. And then they slowly morph into the tessellation of these white fish that eventually become more fully realized and then more simplified. And then, of course, they turn into birds. They are blackbirds here with the white fish in between them. And we can see that he starts introducing this new color here, the red. And the red gets bigger and bigger. The red becomes a red bird in its own right. So now we have fully realized blackbirds with red birds flying in the opposite direction. And now all of a sudden he's able to bring a white bird, a blackbird, and a red bird and make a new tessellation out of that. And then slowly transform those shapes into three-dimensional cubes. You probably know where this is going. The cubes often turn into a little Italian seaside town, very similar to the one that we saw before. But in this case, that seaside town has this little extension to it, this tower that's out in the water. And then the tower becomes the rook in a three-dimensional chess game. Probably not surprising to you that M.C. Escher loved chess. And actually, he was very concerned that people would judge the move that he had depicted in Metamorphosis here. From the chess game, he transforms that three-dimensional board into a two-dimensional board and then back into the word metamorphose. So he takes us on quite a journey here, and you can imagine all of the time and effort it took to make those perfect interlocking tessellations all along the way. Now, the lizards or the reptiles become like a primary interest for him. Here is a version of the lizards that he did, and this is in like poster paint here. Again, it's tricolor. It's just kind of fun to see how he interlocks those arms and legs and has that suggestion of movement there. This, of course, leads to another one of his most popular prints, which is simply known as lizards or reptiles. This is a lithograph from 1943, and he sets an awesome stage for us here. It's an open sketchbook. It's his sketchbook, right? And we can see one of these lizard tessellations inside the sketchbook, but then they start to emerge, sort of like those hands that were drawing each other before. They emerge as three-dimensional forms, and they walk right off the page, right across this still life. In fact, this is a book about natural history here, up this triangle that's used in geometry over here to this three-dimensional polygon shape, through this little still life, and then back into the page becoming two-dimensional again. This print was so successful, so popular, that it was actually reproduced in color. And I think maybe you'll agree with me, it's not quite as successful in color. But I remember when I first saw it, I was like, oh, look, this little reptile is like breathing smoke like a dragon. So not necessarily any particular kind of reptile that we're looking at here. Okay. Now we are going to switch gears and we're going to consider some of M.C. Escher's work in the illusions and the impossible. And I think this is a favorite area for so many people. We're going to start pretty early on in his career. This is a 1928 woodblock print called Castle in the Air. His son said that it was at this time in their family's history that M.C. Escher would have been reading a lot of fairy tales to his kids. And he thinks that the fairy tales sort of inspired this work here. We can see this giant tortoise here with a figure on its back. But when I first saw this, the first thing I thought of when I saw this like medieval town that's like on top of this hill and seems to be floating above the water, it reminded me of Mont Saint Michel. It reminded me of that famous abbey that is occasionally isolated, becomes an island, this island fortress on this hill. And I thought, that's, could M.C. Escher have seen that? Of course he did. In fact, he traveled there as a teenager with his family. This is a snapshot that the Escher family took from their rowboat as they were heading out to Mont Saint Michel. In fact, young teenage M.C. Escher might have taken this picture himself. And what we will see throughout tonight's program is that he so often goes back to a place that he visited a decade or even more before, and he finds a way to incorporate that in what he's working on present day. Now, this next image is a real remarkable one. This is simply called Still Life with a Mirror. It's a lithograph from 1934. And this is one of his very first images where he's combining two completely unrelated spaces. There's a sense of the impossible in something like this. So we start off with this beautiful still life. We've got this little tabletop here with his toothbrush and the toothpaste and the comb and the brush. And we get the sense that this is like a little table for your toiletries. Yet somehow in this sort of tilted mirror here, we're not seeing somebody's face. We're seeing a reflection of like a medieval alleyway. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. And then he gives us this clue that it really doesn't make any sense because there is a candle right in front of this mirror and it's not reflected in that glass. So, not surprisingly, MC Escher used a medieval alleyway that he had in fact visited earlier as the inspiration for that view that you see in the mirror in the work over here on the right. So he's beginning to dabble in the unreal, in the impossible. And I love this next work here. This is a woodcut print. It's called Still Life in the Street. And this is really considered his first impossible reality. This is from 1937. So we'll start with this lovely little still life in the foreground. We've got the playing cards and the matches and the pipe. He did not smoke a pipe, but he loved to include them in his works. This beautiful reflection in this pottery, and then these stacks and rows of books on either side of the still life. And then there's somehow like space just collapses between the books and this city view from like across an alleyway. Somehow these books look like they're 2 stories high, just pressed up against those buildings. And then he takes us for a little ride down this alley, and we can see into great depth here. So he is inviting us, the viewer, to go back and forth again and again and to try and make sense out of like, where does the still life end and this landscape begin or the cityscape begin, and vice versa. Our brains are trying to make sense of how he has collapsed space and scale here. So probably not surprisingly, where he goes next is about perspective. Now, this is kind of like a challenging image to look at and to make sense of. It's called Up and Down. This is from 1947, so sometime later. This is another lithograph. What are we looking at here? It's not about collapsing space. It's not about playing with scale. Instead, we are looking at one scene from 2 different perspectives, if you can imagine. So at the top of the image, we are looking at a little boy on the staircase who's talking to a woman up above him in the window. And then we look down here, and now we're looking up at the boy who's looking up at the window. So we are looking down and up at the exact same scene. How does he resolve this? Somehow he makes the ceiling the floor. We can see this tower here that looks like it's coming up to a ceiling becomes the floor for the scene up above. It's illogical. It is impossible. And it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And as with so many MC Escher things, it may have been inspired by a space that he knew pretty well. His high school actually had a staircase that looked very similar to this, complete with these little windows looking out over at it. So staircases might have been inspired by some of his early or secondary school learning. And not surprisingly, this is going to take us to the most famous staircases of all time. This is, again, one of his most famous prints. This is called Relativity from 1953. Don't you just love this work? This work has become, in like just a few short decades, really, right? It's like a shorthand for an illogical dream sequence, right? It's being in a space that doesn't make any sense. It's something that seems so real yet is so clearly illogical at the same time. So if you're anything like me, it's like I'm thinking of like surrealism and Salvador Dali and all of that. He's aware of it, but he's not trying to do what they do. He's always interested in the math and science. So with relativity, he kind of invites us into this space that's occupied by all of these faceless figures, these like mannequins, kind of invites us in with this figure at the bottom in the foreground who's walking up this initial set of steps. To the side, we can see a whole world that exists on a different axis, really. And then we imagine where this figure can go from here, and we see staircases. It seems illogical to say leading up and down, but there's staircases leading up, and on the bottom of them, staircases leading illogically down. Then there's a staircase at the top that seems to be emerging out sideways from a wall. And for each one of these figures, they seem to have their own sense of gravity on these staircases, no matter what direction they are pointed in. And then we get these little snippets of life outside of this space. This has always felt like the most illogical apartment complex to me. So like I said, this has become a visual shorthand for something that doesn't make sense. Many of you are probably already thinking of the Jim Henson movie, Labyrinth. Great shot here with David Bowie in an Escher inspired dreamscape here. And if you are a Labyrinth fan, as I am, you may even remember that early on in the movie, we get a little preview of what's to come because the protagonist is sitting on her bed looking at a poster of M.C. Escher's Relativity right there in her bedroom. Later has this nightmarish sequence of trying to catch her baby brother who's going up and down these M.C. Escher stairs. My husband is a huge fan of Disney, and so imagine my surprise when we were like going on the Haunted Mansion a couple of years earlier, or a couple of years ago, and I see these M.C. Escher inspired staircases with footprints leading all around, up and down. So they've been featured in all kinds of other movies. Since then, you probably have your own personal favorite reference to those staircases, but those are a few that popped out immediately to me. Escher continues on with these impossible constructions. This one is called Belvedere. It's a lithograph. It's from 1958. And this is an architectural, well, a belvedere, I've just learned this, is Italian for beautiful view. And it refers to a kind of architectural construction that is just created. It could be any style, but it's there to prioritize a beautiful view. So we've got these two balconies in this case, and they look like they're kind of stacked on top of one another. But if you follow one, if we're on one level and we follow it from end to end, it seems like it's receding back into depth from left to right. And then you go to the next level and it looks like it's receding back from right to left up above. How does he achieve this? Because there is at the same time this stunning realism to what we're looking at. There's a verisimilitude. Everything looks like it's solidly constructed. So how does he do this? He creates these archways here with these columns emerging down from them, and he basically swaps the sides that the columns are supposed to be attached to in order to create this illusion of an impossible construction. Now, he based the whole concept on the idea of an impossible cube. And if we zero in on this figure down below, we can see he's actually sitting there holding, contemplating an impossible cube. Sort of the idea that if you draw a line drawing that is a cube and you sort of swap those that line in the front and the line in the back, you would create an impossible cube like this. One of the things that I love is that the people just kind of inhabit this world as though nothing's mysterious about this or nothing. It's like it's just everyday life in an impossible structure. We see this quite a bit in his work. The next impossible structure we're going to consider is this one here from 1960. It's called Ascending and Descending. We are looking down at almost like a tower structure here. I guess I always assumed that it was like a monastery or something because we have these hooded figures here. Maybe they're monks, maybe they're knights, it's hard to say, but they are marching up and down on the set of stairs that seems to wrap around this quadrangle space. And if you follow each one of them, they always seem as though the stairs are rising in every single direction, which of course makes no sense. I love the figures that have opted out of this drudgery, right? They're like, I see where this is going. There's no end in sight. I'm just going to take a little break. So, M.C. Escher at this point is well familiar with the mathematicians, the Penroses, father and son, who had devised the idea of the Penrose stairs or the Penrose triangle that we see over here on the right. We can see M.C. Escher playing with that, modifying it just a little bit to make it a quadrangle here and create this impossible set of stairs. Again, all sorts of wonderful pop cultural references here. We've got a Simpsons reference. Of course, Homer's going to chase Bart forever. And then some of you might have appreciated the movie Inception from a few years back. There is a whole sequence where these protagonists are just walking around a set of stairs in an office building, and they are just walking up and up and up around a quadrangle like this. And the whole idea here is that it's a dreamscape and it's something that they can resolve with their minds, but not really in a physical world, right? So our last impossible construction is this one here called Waterfall. This is from 1961. This is a beautiful lithograph, and it's another ingenious exploration of impossible architecture, and now in this case, perpetual motion too. So if we start with the eponymous waterfall, we can see the water coming off of this ledge down to a water wheel, sort of splashing here, and then the water wheel pushing it away. We can sort of follow the flow of this water up a hill, around a corner, up another hill, around another corner, and now the water has been pushed uphill all the way back to the top of this waterfall. Now, we all know that water does not flow uphill. And again, M.C. Escher has created another impossible piece of architecture to enable this happening. And he's done this again by sort of swapping where these columns should be landing in order to create the illusion of this impossible trajectory for the water. It's mind-boggling because it looks like solid architecture. It looks like it should work. And again, you have these people going about the mundane tasks of everyday life, hanging laundry, as though water wasn't flowing uphill right alongside her. So there's a lot of fanciful elements to these impossible construction images. I just love them. We're going to turn our attention now to reflections and distortions. Now, when it comes to M.C. Escher, we think a lot about his self-portraits and reflecting spheres and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fun in this section too. This is one of his early self-portraits in a reflecting spherical mirror. We have a woodcut print here from 1921. So he's still a very young man when he created this, just about 23 years old. And in this case, he has put himself at the center of this sphere. There's nothing really distorting his likeness, which is simplified and almost cartoonish, but he is focused on the distortions of the space, the room around him. And then what I think is so interesting is that he puts this sphere against a black backdrop and he populates it with like planets and stars and shooting stars. So it's as though this sphere that we see him occupying is just another planet out there in the void, out there in the cosmos. It's a suggestion of like this wild ride that he has all by himself here on planet Earth. It is, of course, a reference to the famous self-portrait in a convex mirror. We spent some time looking at this a few months ago during the art talk on artist self-portraits. This is by the Italian Renaissance artist Parmigianino from the early 1500s. It was sort of a groundbreaking work for the time where we can see this young man's beautiful reflection, but also the distortions of his hand and the room around him and how they were so beautifully accomplished and how it helped for him as a young person to emerge into the spotlight. So reflections and distortions become a bit of a fascination for M.C. Escher. This is a knockout of a work. I really like this one. It's called Still Life with a Spherical Mirror from 1934. This is also a lithograph. There's a copy of it there's a version of it at the National Gallery of Art in DC. So let's just get located with this. We are looking at a still life. It's a book with a folded newspaper on top of it. There's this strange little sculpture of a blackbird with a human head. And lying on its side is this reflective vessel that is showing us a little bit of that newspaper, too. All of this is set against this inky black backdrop. But then there's a whole other picture within the picture, and it's the rest of this reflection. We can see the bird in distortion. We can see the rest of MC Escher's studio space, including the artist who is working on this very work in front of him. And the distortions are perfect. He just gets it perfectly right. He's studied this so carefully. Here's just a fun aside. Here's a photograph of MC Escher with that little bird sculpture. I think it was like his father-in-law or somebody who gave it to him early on in his life. So it finds its way into a number of his works. I just had to be I had to edit out a lot of versions of works that have this little sculpture in it. I was fascinated by it. We're going to move on to another very famous self-portrait by the artist. This one is called Hanwit's Reflecting Sphere from 1935. I always thought he looked so old in this self-portrait, and it's still a fairly early work. It's a fascinating book because he gives us his whole world once again as a reflection in a sphere here. So he gets those distortions of his world just exactly right. And then I think what's perhaps most stunning in this work is how he's rendered the human hand, that his own hand, right, that's holding this sphere here, and how we get the reflection of that hand as well. Just like Leonardo da Vinci, he thought of the hand as being like this really important form of communication. He felt like hands always told the truth. So that hand is really taking up almost as much space as that sphere. It's just beautifully rendered here. So he continues on with spheres. He's fascinated by spheres. This work is called Three Spheres 2 from 1946. So this is almost a decade later. He's still thinking about spheres. Notice here that the three spheres really only occupy the top half of this composition. The first sphere, if we read them from left to right, looks like it is a glass ball. And not only has he captured the reflection of light, he's captured the refraction of light as well, and the way light would then spill onto the surface that the sphere is resting on. We have another reflecting sphere at the center here where we can see the artist's self-portrait. And once again, we see him working on the very work that we are looking at. So this is another sort of recursive self-portrait here, because in theory, this is a loop that would go on forever. We'd see him working on three spheres. He would be inside that center sphere working on three spheres. It just goes on and on. We can also see the reflections of the two other spheres here. And the last one is just this solid form. It doesn't have a texture to it, but it has this very different relationship with the light in this work. So incredibly complicated, incredibly technical. We can see just how wedded he is to precision with his investigation of spherical reflections. Maybe this all culminates with his image of the eye. This is from 1946. I believe this is a mezzotint. We get sort of like a velvety texture with this print and these very sort of inky black areas as well. So the mezzotint here in the eye, we have this remarkable description of hair on a human face, from the eyelashes to the eyebrows, the folds of human flesh above the eye, the wrinkles just below it. We get the luminous quality, or the moisture of the eyeball here, particularly there at the inner eye. We see the iris, we see the pupil, and then we see that reflection of the skull, which is always, I think, sort of like the ta-da in this particular image, because of course, that's what he's staring down. He's staring down death. And of course, you might remember from other presentations that the Dutch in particular love this idea of a memento mori, the concept of like a vanitas in a work of art, that reminder that we must die, that life is short, right? And so we have this idea of staring down death here, but it's also about the curvature of the eye. And we see a similar fascination with this work here. This is called Balcony. It's from 1945. It's almost as though he created a nice little cityscape here and then put a lens or a magnifying glass right over the center of the image, blowing up and distorting that balcony, making the picture seem as though it's kind of bulging out at us. Um, because it's MC Escher, that little cityscape was actually borrowed from a much earlier print that he had made. So this cityscape over here on the right is probably reflective of this little patch of cityscape that we see over here. And this earlier print actually serves as the inspiration for a later very involved work that's called the Print Exhibition or the Print Gallery. This is from 1956. It's a lithograph over here on the right. It starts off with MC Escher's earlier print with this boat. You can see somebody looking at a print of that boat here. We're going to zoom in here on the Print Gallery. It is a very complicated work. It's a work where space explodes and then folds in on top of itself. So where do we start here? Maybe you want to walk through this little archway at the bottom and then down this print gallery, and you become this figure who's staring at this print. And then as our eye moves up, we can see that the print begins to expand. We can see that cityscape along the top that then sort of folds over the entire image and then becomes one with the architecture, the structure of the print gallery itself. Really complicated stuff here. And to MC Escher's credit, he didn't quite know how to resolve this distortion, so he just left a blank circle at the center. That's where he signed his name. It's very unlike him to not know how something resolves. Since we're running a little long, I want to quickly show you some of his reflections. We've seen reflections in a sphere. He does a lot of nature reflections as well. They're usually on puddles or lakes, and they're of bare trees in like a moonlit set against a moonlit sky. In this case, this is a lino cut. Like it would be really hard to carve these squiggly lines in like a woodcut, for instance, but he creates that illusion of the ripples, these concentric circles that are distorting the reflection of these trees here. He kind of zooms in on a puddle view in this image. I love this image because the reflected sky in this picture seems so beautiful, so serene, but the ground that we see around it just seems like dirty every day. We see tire tracks and footprints heading in different directions, but this beautiful sky with the lovely silhouette of these trees, with the unusual seed buds, because it is MC Escher. This is a reference back to an earlier print that he had done, I think a decade or more earlier. So you can see those similar tree branches here at the top of that earlier print. Everything sort of comes together in this last reflection print for you. It's from 1955 and it's called Three Worlds. It almost reminds me of like a Claude Monet water lily picture, because it is about the surface of this water. In this case, it's like autumn leaves instead of water lilies. We can see all of these intricately rendered different kinds of leaves that are just resting on the surface of that water. We can peer down through the surface of the water to this giant catfish, and then we can see the reflection on the surface of this water too, with these naked tree branches that we know are reaching up into the air, but the reflections appear as though they are reaching down into the water. So he's captured these three realms so beautifully in this work here. Now we are just going to touch upon the idea of the infinite right now. This becomes sort of a preoccupation, I think, closer towards the end of his life, although these themes are always present. This work here is called The Horseman from 1946, And we can see here sort of a reference back to tessellations too. It's as though we're looking at a ribbon. And these horsemen are parading around this ribbon infinitely, changing from red to gray, and then sort of crossing from one side to the next in this beautiful tessellation. Escher wrote about how he imagined that this was like a strip of fabric, and you could see the inverse of the horseman image on the inside of the fabric. Here's just an image of the artist printing this image again later on in his life. The Mobius strip is another exploration of the infinite. A Mobius strip is like a plane that has one side and one edge. So it's like an infinite loop. And so he's emphasized this by having all of these red ants crawling around his Mobius strip. And you can sort of follow them on their journey. Where would they end up, right? They could just keep going on forever and ever. Now, he doesn't use red that often in his prints, but it makes a visual impact. We are struck by these giant, sort of disgusting red ants, and we are, I think, compelled to figure out this path that they are on. Now, I think Escher's explorations of the infinite are sort of at their best when he starts doing his circle limit series. This is exploring geometry and tessellations, not just any geometry. Apparently, it's called hyperbolic geometry. I Ask me later and I'll try my best to explain it, but it's basically this idea of a flat plane that's actually curved in different directions infinitely, almost like going from a tabletop to a saddle. So it's curving in different directions. And so he's trying to capture that within the space of a circle. And he's expressing that as these shapes get further and further away, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. They never touch the edge of the circle, and they become sort of as small as possible, as small as his printing equipment will allow him to render. So what we have with this, oh, here's a little grid to help us understand that a little bit better. But what we have here is the tessellation between good and evil. So we have this black sort of devil or bat-like form, and it's accompanied by this white angel form. It goes back to some of his earliest images of like good and bad, this duality, sort of grappling with like the nature of the world with something like this that he's doing very close to the end of his life. This is 1960. So big ideas here, very complicated math as well. And we'll end our look at his career with a work that he intended to be his very last print. This is from 1969, and it's called Snakes, appropriately, right? I kind of wish this was an image of a snake eating itself, because that would be the perfect way to end a section on the infinite, but it's always more complicated than that when it comes to MC Escher. This is three snakes in a roughly triangular formation. They're kind of interlocking and weaving in and out of each other, but also resting on and weaving in and out of this ringlet shape that we have here. And the rings are actually our infinity in this image. So where the snakes are, the rings are roughly consistent in size, but as we move towards the middle, they get infinitely smaller. And as we move towards the edge, they get infinitely smaller too. So here's the man working in the final years of his life, creating such precise technical imagery. I mean, his capabilities have not diminished at this point. If anything, he's at his best. And he's thinking about how things and what things never end. Isn't that kind of amazing? It's poetic. So we finish up with MC Escher's legacy tonight. MC Escher passed away at the age of 73 in 1972. We can see his tombstone here, and how appropriate is it that there is a tessellation on his grave? It's not just a tessellation, but it's a metamorphosis. I think it might be like a little wink to the idea of reincarnation, right? Coming back as something else, always changing. And of course, since he passed away, there has been, I think, a consistent fascination with all things that are impossible, all things that are illusions. So you have this Hungarian artist here. His name is Orolc. I'd be happy to try and, well, I can spell that out in the chat for you, but he's working with the idea of eyes and reflections and impossible architecture here. He actually even created a self-portrait in a sphere where he's hanging out over MC Escher's shoulders. So really sort of recognizing whose shoulders he's standing on. There's also a Canadian artist named Rob Gonsalves who probably stands out among most of the artists that dabble in illusion. His works, I think, continue to fascinate. You can always see them sort of resurfacing on the internet every few years or so. Here's a work where he's taken architecture, sort of impossible architecture because it kind of melts away, and he takes those clouds within the negative space of this bridge or aqueduct, and it slowly transforms into almost like a pirate ship that emerges kind of fully liberated from that architecture here on the right. There's a lot of ideas that he borrows from MC Escher. This is a really fun image where we can see children building these skyscrapers in the foreground with everyday blocks. But then the space collapses and our sense of scale is shifted because it seems as though those children's blocks become the city skyscrapers. And even the child up in the tree seems to be placing blocks on top of that skyscraper. It's kind of similar to that same idea that we saw with the still life in city view. Another Gonsalves picture, we can see people bicycling down a street with the fall leaves at their underneath their bicycle wheels. In the distance, these beautiful sort of like brick mansions. But then we can look sort of down past those leaves and see that they are the tops of trees and that the street actually continues down below. It's just like MC Escher's picture of up and down. It's collapsing that space. It's giving us two different perspectives of the same view, essentially. One last Gonsalves picture, and you probably know where this is going. He's taking us, he's giving us this view of a landscape that then sort of seamlessly merges with a chessboard. And so the architecture out in that field turns into chess pieces as well, probably reminding most of us of MC Escher's Metamorphosis series. So very quickly in the time we have left, oh, we're already over time, we will just look back over Escher's career, look back over his shoulder here as he's gazing into a reflecting ball. We can see that he is an artist that has many similarities to people like Leonardo da Vinci, who came centuries before him. In many ways, Escher embodied the idea of a Renaissance artist mathematician, wielding both this creative vision and the mathematical precision to explore fundamental structures underlying reality itself. His work bridges these two worlds that are so oftentimes seen as separate, proving that mathematical beauty and artistic wonder are not opposites, but in fact partners in revealing the hidden elegance in our universe. I will end there for now, and I welcome any questions or comments that you have about MC Escher, or if you want to school me in some hyperbolic geometry. I'll start looking at the chat right now. Thank you again, everybody, for being here tonight. First question about the recording. I believe it will be shared with you. The recording is coming from Chelmsford Public Library, so if you don't get it in the next day or so, you can always reach out to them. Somebody says, please discuss the open book in the upper right corner of the still life with the lizards, the open book. Let's go back to that. The open book. We don't know much about that open book. I don't think that there's actual legible text in that book, but I think he's trying to give us like this rational world here. I think that's why he's specifically like using, bringing in tools that that a mathematician would use, referencing a book on natural history. It's hard to know what that is, but it's tempting to say, you know, it's part of this world this three-dimensional illusionistic world that makes sense in a picture that doesn't make sense, probably. That's my best guess. Somebody says it's hard enough to figure out what we're looking at in these pictures with changing perspectives. How could he manage to keep this in his head as he created them? I completely agree. What a brain. Especially when you look at something like up and down, for instance, this one is mind boggling to me to think about how you resolve that impossible architecture there is really stunning. How does he color the wood blocks? Sharon asks. Sharon, I'm not sure if he colors any of the wood blocks. The color that let's see. Oh, no, he does, of course, because with the metamorphosis. I think, I'm not an expert in the how of that, but I'm sure we could probably find some good tutorials about that on YouTube. Sharon, I'm sorry, I don't have a good, easy answer for you on that. But I think of it as like the wood block, you're inking it, you could probably add a different color to it. I'm not sure. Great question. Um, Barbara says, do we know if Escher used photography to assist his art? Great question, Barbara. I'm not sure. I'm not sure offhand. My hunch from what I know about him in his process was that he was interested in photographs that he had taken earlier in his life, but he was primarily working from his own sketches too. Mary Zoll is here tonight. She says, please show the two pictures of the lizards crawling out of the back of the page and back into the page, one color, one black and white. Let's go back to that. There's the color one, which as I go back and forth, I can sort of see that this one looks a little bit distorted. About 30 copies of this lithograph were made when he created the print. I'm not sure about how many were made with the color one. Mary says, I don't know what kind of snake that is in the last image, but it has a triangular head, so it's venomous. Ooh, that's a good piece of information. His very last image of snakes, venomous snakes. Good to know. Claire says, oh, thank you, Claire, for your kind words. And somebody else says, in many of the pictures, there's a sort of block with MCE in it. It reminds me of a Japanese chop, which is used as one signature. Oh, that's an interesting connection. And I see that right there, an interesting signature that he adopted. So I'm not familiar with a Japanese chop, but that sounds like a very cool connection. And now I'm wondering how interested he might have been in Japanese woodblock printing. So he might have been inspired by something he had seen before. Thanks for adding that. All right, I'm going to go back through the chat. Everybody, thank you for the kind words. Um, oh, Barbara says, I'm surprised you can't see the photographer in that last photo. That must be the one where he's looking over his shoulder. I didn't even think of that, Barbara, but now I have to see. Let's see. Oh, no, here we go. Sorry. Where is the photographer? Okay, that's fascinating. They would have had to have been right about there, right? Interesting. Um, oh, I love that people are in love with MC Escher. You can't be in anything but awe, right? I mean, the work that he produced and the variety of it too, from the tessellations to the architecture to the reflections. It was like, I mean, he kept going back to a couple of things that truly fascinated him, but he did it all so, so well. Thank you, everybody, for your very kind words. Let's see. Beatrice says, I never thought I needed to see Escher, and now I can't wait to watch the recording. I love that you feel that way. Um, Julie says, in one of the first slides, it looked like the bottom half was a woman sleeping. Julie, let's see if I can find that because now I'm fascinated. He doesn't often take up the subject of the female form, but maybe we can find what you were looking for. The bottom half is a woman sleeping. Well, there is definitely a woman figure. This may or may not be what you're referring to, but eyes wide open right there. Um, maybe in one of these prints, who's to say? Julie, you might have to get back in touch with me and let me know. Sarah says, I think you cut a separate block for each color in a block print. That's how my mom used to make Christmas cards. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. I appreciate that. Um, Hopefully that's helpful to other people and kind of figuring out his process here. In the picture with the lizards climbing off the page, says Robin, I love the one snorting smoke. It's like a dragon. It's so whimsical, right? It's a little surprise on this parade of lizards. Kathy says, another artist I now see is worth taking another look at. Thanks, Kathy. I'm glad you like this. Thank you, everybody, for your very kind words. I have so much fun doing this, so I love that you see my enthusiasm and appreciation. Um, Sarah says she loved his art ever since she was a kid and she first laid eyes on it. Thank you, everybody, for very kind words. And, and thank you for your kind words. Let's see. Oh, Julie says it's the one you're on now with the city on top. Maybe a female figure. I don't know. I don't know if I see it, but oh, maybe down here. Yeah, we've got some rolling hills that could sort of pass for for a female form. Sarah, I see what you're saying. I like it too. Um, Woodblock prints. Yes, so he could have very well been influenced by Japanese woodblock prints. Patricia says, did he use tools like rulers, spheres to create his prints? Was any drawing freehand? I would imagine he would have required um, tools like a ruler. I mean, even the lizard print where we see that triangle that would have been like a something that somebody who works in geometry used. I mean, there's a reason why he has something like this handy, I think. So I think he would have required some tools for the amount of precision that he had. And I think he certainly did have access to reflective spheres in order to make those self portraits and to get those distortions just right. Um, Oh, Julie, yes, you can always reach out to me. Go to my website, which is I am culturally, I'm putting in the chat. I am culturallycurious.com. And you can just click on the um, contact contact us link. Okay. All right. I think I got through the comments. I think I got through the Q&A. Thank you, everybody. Oh, no, there's still more. Hold on. Okay, here we go. No, okay. I think we covered everything. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. I love that you were fascinated by MC Escher. I sure was. This is a delight to share this with you tonight. Always a pleasure. I look forward to next month. The end of next month, we will be looking at the swirling world of Art Nouveau. Could it be any different, any more different from MC Escher? Thank you, everybody, for your time. As always, if you want to reach out, please do. It's always a pleasure. And I'm just humbled and grateful for all of your kindness and for everybody being here every month. Take good care, and I will see you soon. Thank you.